I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Hello, welcome to Bethel Evangelical Free Church Handling on YouTube. I'm Pastor Charmley, and in this video I want to look at what it means to confess with the Apostles' Creed that God is the maker of heaven and earth. Not simply to consider the fact of divine creation, but the implications of that creation. Because there are implications. The Bible does not simply give us brute facts, but facts that have definite and certain meaning. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And of course the first thing that this means is very obviously that God made everything. It is a confession about the origin of all things. Every society has its origin story, but apart from the biblical account, these are origin myths. That is to say, they are stories that are not true, but are groping for an explanation, or they are substitutions of another explanation. Every society has its origin myths, and those origin myths are many and various. But only in the scriptures do we have an origin account that is true and real. God made everything. And God made everything out of nothing. The writer of the Hebrews says that by faith we understand that the things that are seen were not made out of things that appear. And the point he's making is that God isn't like a builder. No, we've got a fair amount of building going on in Hanley at the moment, in Stoke at the moment. Not as much as has been in the past, but there's building going on, new houses. The Sentinel the other day was just pointing up the number of new houses that have been built. And when it comes to house building, what happens is that the site is prepared and the builder then uses existing materials, brick, mortar, breeze block, concrete, wood, and other things to form the building. He organizes. Now that's an idea about creation that some of the Greek philosophers had. It's the idea that the Mormons have, the Latter-day Saints. They say that the gods organized matter, because the idea that's behind both of these is that matter is eternal. That matter, the raw stuff, if you will, has an existence apart from God. And this is necessary, of course, if you hold to the view that says that God is not the Almighty. And this is why there's an order to the creed, and that order isn't entirely a historic order, it's also a logical order. We confess that God is the Almighty before we confess that he is the maker of heaven and earth. That God, in the beginning, God created all things. And he did not create them out of things that appear, but he created the matter itself. He created out of nothing, and nothing is not to be thought of as being some kind of stuff that God formed. All things were made by him, but he himself is not made. The gotcha question that some people ask on the streets, and it's very difficult to respect people who ask this. They say, well, if God made everything, who made God? And the answer is, well, God's the uncreated creator. Some of us understand that there are categories, that some things fit into some categories and others don't fit into those categories. So you have the categories of created beings and the uncreated being. And to say that there is an uncreated being does not affect the category of created beings, except to say that they are created by that uncreated being. God is distinct from the creation. That's another implication of this confession that God created. There is a belief known as pantheism, and pantheism says that when we use the word God, what we mean is the sum of all things, the universe, as some have put it. In other words, in this view, God equals the universe. But no, if God created the universe, then God is not the universe. The universe is not an extension of God's being. It is something that is apart from God. It is separate from God, although God is at work in the universe. And the Bible is very clear that God's creation, God having created the universe, means that God rules the universe. He who is the creator is also the ruler. He is the judge. And what that means is that everything in the universe is subject to him. He has created everything, and so it's all subject unto him. But also he created everything for himself. Now when we say for himself, we must recognize the mystery of the Trinity, which means that we can also say that all things are created for the Son, because that's what the Bible very clearly says in Colossians, that all things were made for him. And all things were made through him, as the Apostle John puts it, and again as Paul in Colossians, all things were made through Christ, who is the Creator. So John says this, for example, in the prologue of his Gospel. Paul says this in Colossians 1:16, 17. And so, as Paul says in Romans 1:19, every created thing is a revelation of God, in a sense that his eternal power and Godhead are seen in the things that are made. It's rather like if you take, for example, this rather beautifully bound copy of the Book of Common Prayer, that the binding tells us something about the bookbinder. It shows us the skill and the ability of the bookbinder to work in this rather nice dark green leather. The creation shows us the skill and the power of the God who created all things. But then God also is at work in creation. He is at work, first of all, as Hebrews tells us, he upholds all things by the word of his power, Hebrews 1:3. That he is at work in providence in creation. It is God who sends the rain, it is God who sends the storms. It is God who is working his purposes out in the providence, the great providence of heaven. And of course in redemption. The work of Christ is a work in history, within the created world. It's not a work that is somewhere out there in the ideal realm, in some sort of spiritual realm. It's here and in the creation. Christ came into the world to save sinners, which also tells us that God's concern for his people. We also find in the account of the creation that human beings are unique. We alone are made in the image of God, as we find in Genesis 1:26. It is our fall, our disobedience, that has led to the ruin of creation. So the whole creation is subject, as the Apostle Paul says, to futility because of human sin. And it is because of human sin that Christ became man. Another thing we see with the redemption is that it's not simply a matter of God sending messengers into the creation, it's God himself coming into the creation. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. The Word became flesh. It's always notable that John doesn't say the Word became a man. He says the Word became flesh, that element of mankind, of humanity that people find most upsetting. Human flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Creation matters, therefore. What this means Another implication of divine creation is that creation matters, that the physical matters. One of the great errors that has arisen again and again in human history is what's been called a matter-spirit dualism. Now, what does that mean? It means basically it's the idea that the material is bad and the spiritual is good. Matter-spirit dualism. The problem with matter-spirit dualism, of course, is that it's wrong. But why is it wrong? It's wrong because God created the material as well as the spiritual. So our problem isn't that we are, as some of the Gnostics imagined, that we're sparks of the divine, trapped in these bodies. Rather, our problem is that we are fallen creatures, body and soul, who need to be redeemed, body and soul. And that is the real issue here. And then we see also in the Bible that God's aim is recreation. The Apostle Peter says we look for a new heavens and new earth in which righteousness dwells. So that our goal is not a disembodied state, it's not to become disembodied spirits, but we look for the resurrection of the dead, for a new creation, a recreation, but a creation that has, again, a heavens and an earth, the resurrection of the body, not the sublimation of the body, not the destruction of the body, but the resurrection of the body. God's being the creator means that the creation matters. It's another important point. It also means that we don't either despise the creation or worship the creation, and these are two things that lead to all manner of suffering. First of all, worshipping the creation has historically led to suffering. People in the past, pagans in the past, and pagans today, view the creation, the world, as divine in some way, as inhabited by myriad divine spirits, perhaps. Now, what this has commonly led to in the past is human sacrifice. They found in peat bogs in Britain, in Scandinavia, people who have been apparently ritually sacrificed to the bog. We know not why. Human sacrifice to the creation, worshipping the creation rather than the creator, leads to human cruelty. On the other hand, there is a despising of the creation that comes, for example, from a lot of people in the so-called Enlightenment era in the 18th century, took the view that the creation was basically a machine and a collection of machines, and that animals were just machines. And that leads, of course, to a very inhumane approach to animals. But also, if the creation is something that is there simply to be exploited, then that means that strip mining landscape is perfectly okay. Some of the Enlightenment thinkers even use the revolting imagery of raping Dame Nature. But the Bible says no, God created man to have dominion. Now that doesn't mean absolute dominion. It can't do, because God is the only one who has absolute dominion. He is the Almighty. No, rather we are answerable to Him. That we see that we are a part of creation. We are a distinct and special part of creation, but we are a part of creation. And our role is to have dominion for God's glory. And so again, the Bible preserves us from both a denigration of creation, which destroys our environment, and a worship of creation, which causes great human suffering. Instead, we are to trust in God, look to God, and to look at the creation and say, this is God, God has made it. We are to exercise responsible dominion over the creation for his glory and in his name, because we believe in God the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and help you in the understanding of his holy word.